I hope everyone is well. I'm delighted to be with you this afternoon on the occasion of this big meeting of insurance. It's my fourth edition, and I'm always glad to come and discuss very important topics. And this afternoon we'll have 4 discussion panels, which will span 30 to 40 minutes, with experts who will enlighten us on a certain number of topics. The first one is the challenge, or the challenges facing insurers and reinsurers to do with climate change, after which we will discuss these disastrous events, one of which has affected us in Morocco, the El Haouz earthquake, but we'll look at things more broadly to see how insurers can tackle those events, which are unpredictable and devastating, how to prevent them, but also manage their consequences post-earthquake. And then we'll focus on maritime insurance, especially in the face of social, environmental, and governmental challenges. And it will be the opportunity to address a certain number of related topics. And finally, we'll mention and discuss major risks. States and organizations are facing ever larger challenges with larger consequences. Are those organizations ready to tackle those challenges? Do they have the right people to manage the risks? So this is the agenda for this afternoon. We are due to finish by 6 p.m. We'll try and abide by the time limit. But to start off, we have the pleasure to have a Dutch participant. He represents the Dutch Association of Insurers. As you know, the Netherlands is a country that faces submersion in an incredible fashion, given that the Netherlands are largely below sea level. Ladies and gentlemen,
from the Association of the Insurer of Netherlands. Et il va nous parler justement des défis auxquels sont confrontés les assureurs face au changement climatique.
He will discuss the challenges facing insurers in the Netherlands with relation to climate change.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon to you all. My name is Richard Wording. I'm the General Director of the Dutch Association of Insurers. Madame, Messieurs, bon après-midi et salutations.
Good afternoon, greetings from the Netherlands.
Insurance Federation for inviting me to speak here today, especially because I'm going to speak to you about a very important topic. Insuring responsibly, taking responsibility in addressing climate change. And despite the many challenges our industry and society currently need to deal with, I strongly believe that climate change is one of the greatest challenges we all have in front of us. Today, I would like to share with you some insights, and I hope the next slide will come. Yes. Today I would like to share with you some insights on the following topics. First, why do we have a responsibility to come up with solutions? The second, why are Dutch insurers committed to make or keep climate risk insurable? Third, what challenges have we encountered? And fourth, what lessons have we learned? A key term I would like to use in my presentation today is responsibility, a term that is often used in discussions on climate change, but a term that can also make the discussion more difficult and that can stand in the way of finding solutions. And in my experience, taking responsibility and being held responsible are often mixed up. And I would like to illustrate this with an example. A few months ago, I was in London to attend the annual conference organized by our colleagues at the Association of British Insurers, the ABI. And when I arrived at the venue, I was greeted by not only the police, but also by a number of protesters from Extinction Rebellion. Extinction Rebellion is a very activistic NGO that organizes disrupting protests in different parts of the world, and to get attention for what they called the climate emergency. And one of the protesters came to me and said, well, I have a flyer for you, and you are every country has to deal with this NGO in the near future. There is no more time to waste. Later is too late. And on the backside, insurers have the unique opportunity to change the course of history once and for all. Stop insuring fossil fuel projects. And because I personally do not believe that the insurance sector is responsible for climate change, that responsibility does not rest on a single company or even a single industry. It is most likely a combination of many different factors that each contributed to the changes that we see in our climate today. However, that does not mean that we as insurers have no responsibility in finding solutions to address the problems of climate change. On the contrary, we have the knowledge, we have the experience, we have the tools that we can use to find solutions and to help our customers through damage prevention, climate adaptation, and also to keep climate risk insurable. And that is our societal role, insuring responsibly. And therefore, the question for me could not be who is responsible for climate change, but who can take responsibility for addressing the negative consequences of climate change and ultimately find solutions. Having said this, let me go back to the climate change and what it looks like in the Netherlands. In an environment like Casablanca, I can imagine that climate change is usually associated with extremely high temperatures, heat waves, and prolonged periods of drought. But in the context of the Netherlands, where I have my association, our main concern is water. And where most tourist brochures picture my country as a nice and sunny place with quiet rivers, blooming flowers, tulips, you know them, beautiful windmills, watch the windmills, wooden shoes even, but the reality often looks a little bit different. And a little bit more like this. As you can see, we have windmills, but we have also quite a lot of water. And there is even so much water that a large part of my country would disappear below sea level if we do not actively keep the water out. And on the map behind me, you can see all the dark blue areas which are located below the sea level and therefore have a serious risk of flooding. And what makes this even more challenging is that 70% of the population of the Netherlands lives in these blue, dark and light blue areas. And because of this challenging environment, my country had to take measures to prevent large-scale flooding. An extensive network of waterworks, so-called the Dutch Delta Program, was set up throughout the second half of the 20th century to protect the land from flooding from both the various big rivers and the sea. However, the rising sea levels and more extreme weather as a result of climate change will require new ways of thinking about climate adaptation and mitigation in order to keep flood risk manageable. So higher or better dikes are not the only way forward. You might be wondering, how do you insure in the Netherlands the risk of flooding in a country that is largely below the sea level? The short answer is, we don't. The slightly longer answer is that ever since there was a major flood in the southwestern delta part of the Netherlands, you see behind me, it became largely an uninsurable risk. And for a long time, even by law, it was forbidden to insure these risks. In more recent decades, the government has made great efforts to improve flood prevention infrastructure. And we as an industry have tried to step by step increase the flood cover we can offer to our clients. And at the moment, we manage to cover flood damage from the failure of the so-called secondary flood defenses. Generally speaking, the smaller rivers. However, until now, flooding of the large rivers and the sea remain uninsurable in our country. Fortunately, because of the good water management in the Netherlands, major floodings rarely take place. But if they do, people can only rely on a government-led system to compensate for their flood damage. And this is the Damage Compensation Act. A system which at the moment unfortunately is unclear, it is open-ended, and it is slow. The Dutch insurance industry can take a further role to step in. The sector is committed and is also prepared to also make these big river and coastal floods insurable. And there are 3 reasons for this position. First of all, because our customers expect it from us. And secondly, because we believe we are experts in handling claims. We have years of experience in how to deal with claims in an efficient and customer-friendly way. And under the current system of the government, the government first needs to declare the flooding as a major disaster before they can trigger an emergency compensation mechanism. The downside of this system is that the process can take quite long and the amount of compensation is not known beforehand, which creates uncertainty for those affected. Third, having private insurance gives an incentive for people to work on prevention. If businesses and individuals need to pay a premium for the risk that their property floods, they become more aware of this risk and can take action to reduce this risk. For example, taking preventive and adaptive measures like a stone floor instead of a wooden or electro sockets halfway up the wall. In a public system, there are no such incentives for people to actively reduce their own risk. At the same time, we need to be realistic and conclude that we as an industry cannot cover the risk of a major flood in the Netherlands all by ourselves. We need the government and we need reinsurers to act as a backstop. Therefore, July last year, our association presented 2 possible solutions to our government. And that is not for the first time, I can tell you that. The first solution is a system of public-private re-insurance. Insurers take on part of the financial risk. The government intervenes only in really major flood disasters that Dutch insurers cannot bear alone. That is the idea. The second option, it is an adjustment to the current Damage Compensation Act, where insurers can take over the claim settlement as a part of the arrangement. And this provides citizens and businesses with one single front office that deals with the handling of their damage. In this option, financial compensation is still by the government based on a revised law with clear definitions and conditions so that everyone knows exactly what damage is compensated and to what extent, even before a flood occurs. Now let's talk about what more we can do as insurers in addressing climate change. Again, windmills, but these are more modern. But in all seriousness, like with other risks, prevention is the best cure, also when it comes to climate change. Insurers can help in preventing further climate change through investing in more sustainable assets. And our members have committed to the carbon reduction targets that were set out in 2016 in Paris, the climate agreement. And furthermore, we created and signed as a financial sector, also the banks, also the pension funds, a national climate commitment together with the government. So our members nowadays invest in clean energy solutions such as wind farms and solar power. And the effects are showing. This month, the European Commission announced that despite higher energy production, the CO2 emissions by the European energy sector reduced by 47% in the last 20 years, mainly by switching from coal and oil to wind and solar. And these are the figures we like to hear and to which we try to contribute. But I would say equally important is that our members use their influence and their position as shareholders through engagement and voting in big companies that are not yet sustainable, and to help them to steer towards a more sustainable production methods and business models. Although there is always more that can be done in this field, we do see more and more positive examples where these changes are taking place, also as a result of our engagement. And we also need to stay alert that in our role as risk managers, we do not unnecessarily slow down the transition towards a more sustainable society. For example, in the energy transition, we see many of our customers that are placing solar panels on their roofs, so they become less dependent on fossil fuels for their energy consumption. But from a climate perspective, this is great. However, from a risk perspective, this development has some challenges. You see it behind me. In the Netherlands, we saw that there were a number of fires that originated at incorrectly installed solar panels. Now, a natural response from an insurance perspective could be to raise the premiums of home insurance for customers that have solar panels. However, I'm happy to do that. Instead of raising their premiums, our industry, together with the solar power installation companies, developed new safety standards for installation, which reduced the number of fires substantially and allowed premiums to stay stable. And I think this is a great example of how our industry can use its knowledge of risks to help the transition towards a more sustainable future, instead of slowing it down. We need to encourage the clients to change the solar power in the first place. So this is a good movement. Another thing we can do as an industry is to put our data to good use. Our association yearly publishes the so-called Climate Damage Monitor, and you can find it on our website. This interactive tool shows the development of insured climate-related losses through the years and for different types of climate-related risks, such as storm, flooding, hail, and lightning. The aim is to show how the insured losses develop through the years, and also to give our clients insights into the vulnerability to certain risks in the area where they live. We also use our data for prevention purposes. In the Netherlands, we as an association have a partnership with the Royal Dutch Weather Institute. And that is in order to issue the early warnings to policyholders when extreme weather is expected, and also combined with tips what you can do. A study by the United Nations and the Commission on Adaptation shows that such early warning systems can reduce damages up to 30%. 30%. That's quite a lot. Well, despite these good examples, there are more challenges and also barriers. We hear from our members that they struggle with the sustainability reporting requirements that come from European rules and regulations. These can make it difficult for insurance companies to put their sustainable ambitions into action. And these can be a real barrier. Another barrier is a clear transition path from the government towards a net zero economy. Since insurers invest the money of their policyholders, they need to have a clear picture of what the return will be on their investments. And this requires a clear and stable path and how we will transform our economy towards climate neutrality. Another map. And if I'm honest, we will see our government do things that do not help in keeping climate risks insurable. For example, we still see new houses, new neighborhoods being built in areas where extremely high risk of flooding. Those buildings can, according to our data, become uninsurable in the near future. And this will be very difficult to tell the people who live there. And just last week, the government in the Netherlands published a report and the map you see behind me, where they indicate in which areas of the country we can still safely build houses, where more adaptation measures need to be taken, and where building will not be possible anymore. And that is mostly along the big rivers. In these matters, it's up to our industry to point out risks and keep the conversation with politicians and policymakers going, so that hopefully in the future insurers, or at least the knowledge that we have as insurers about climate-related risks, will be taken into account in areas such as city development and spatial planning. So ultimately, we can contribute to making the Netherlands climate adaptive. In conclusion, I promise this is the last and final picture of a windmill. What lessons did we learn in the Netherlands from the discussion on insurability of climate change? First of all, that there is a responsibility on all of us to prevent the climate from changing further and to adapt our surroundings to better withstand the effects that we already see from climate change, mitigation and adaptation. I believe that as an industry, we are uniquely placed as risk takers and investors to take that responsibility and address the problems caused by climate change. We can help our society to move from A to B like a lever. Through our investments, we can not only reduce carbon emissions, but also help the companies we invest in to evolve towards a more sustainable business model. And at the same time, we as an insurer need to make sure that we use our data to focus our investments and prevention efforts to those areas where they have the most positive effects. And as an industry, we cannot solve everything by ourselves. No matter if it is drought, flooding, or severe thunderstorms, we will need commitments and efforts also from other industries, other sectors, governments and cities, citizens in order to effectively address this issue. Our role as insurers is to take our knowledge of risk, our data, our capital, and use those as leverage so we can create solutions for the problems that our clients and society are already facing and experiencing today. And if we manage to do that, we can show that we take social responsibility on climate change. And maybe, just maybe, we can even make the climate protesters of Extinction Rebellion a little bit proud. Insuring responsibly. Thank you very much for your attention. Madame, Monsieur, merci beaucoup.
Merci, Monsieur Wolding. Merci pour cette introduction. Thank
you.
That will allow us to talk a little further about the challenges that we are facing with climate change. Et donc, on va passer au
We're now going to forward to the first discussion panel. We'll be having a possibility to discuss with different channels, talk about innovation, insurance products, forecasts, but also in terms of cooperation between insurance and reinsurance companies and governments. I'm going to ask you to applause Mr. Nicolas Baudusseau, sorry, Director General of the French Council for Prevention, Mrs. Nicole and Mr. Arnaud Chevalier, who is the Technical and Sales Manager at Aon Ray. Thank you for being with us today. Each, you have a microphone? Well, yes, it should. You do have it. Can you please say hello? Everyone is being audible? Yes, excellent. We're going to try in 30 minutes to talk about these very large and wide topics, and we will be addressing some other points that we've agreed to do. Mr. Worden said so. The role of governments, the role of cooperation is very important. The insurers are pivotal, but cannot do it all alone. We're going to see the French example. It is going to be interesting. And I'm going to ask you directly the question on whether, very briefly, you can introduce to us the indemnification or compensation scheme in the face of natural disasters and catastrophes, and mostly recently with the floods in France, as an example. So, it is in a different, more frequent, more intensive fashion, and every year when we see all of the discussions in the media, how the insurers and the governments discharge of their respective roles. In other words, how the French compensation model can make it possible to resist and adapt to climate change that are going to go greater momentum next years. Thank you for the organizers for inviting me in this panel. I am rejoicing my participation in this round table. So this is a PPP, French PPP, grounded and based on national solidarity, and the fact that each and every insured pays a premium, not according to their exposure, but according to what the law and regulatory redactments mention or read, whereby every insured must pay 12% of the MRH premium to the natural disasters and catastrophes. So this is not the only characteristics of this compensation scheme. It is based on the industry of insurance to distribute the contracts, to manage the claims and losses. Very interesting, as we have seen in some activities and adventures of the government in some areas. Over and above the insurance system, the government wanted to do so, but did not know how to. So we needed, of course, to have the insurance industry sector, but also the intervention of insurers is done in a well-standardized, with deductibles, with a system of triggering of guarantees when there is a declaration or reporting by ministerial decree or order. The reason why this system is acceptable for the insurers, it is because they can reinsure themselves with the CCR, public reinsurer. No obligation, but possibility, yes. All or substantially all of the market, of course, would be reinsured by a CCR, offering proportional with stop loss that are limited. Therefore, there is a system that works that way since 1982, which has worked quite well, relatively up until recently, up until 2015. We were compensating on average €1 billion of damages every year. That compensated several millions of claimants and losers. But since 2016, over the last 8 years, this 7 years of 8, the system or the scheme was showing deficit. Why? Because of a drift of claims ratio. For example, the RGA, which with costs that are quite important, This is something that we haven't seen coming, isn't it? Yeah, this is something that we did not expect. First, the claims and loss ratio between 2000 and 2015 was 300 million per annum, i.e. 30% of the compensations paid. But since 2016, it's a 1 billion euro per annum, so it's gone threefold over the last years. Facing a situation to rebalance the scheme, and it was decided by last year's end by the government, which rose from 12 to 20% the system to balance the accounts. This is a short-term solution, yes, but it is at least one that is geared to short-run rebalance the system. Okay, when's my question? Now, in the medium to long term now, how about it? How do we secure the sustainability of this on the whole of France? Mr. Werling said that there are some areas that are much more exposed than others. We're talking about here, in the case of Holland, yes, which are going to entail risks that are recurring fees and fixed fees with disparities according to the territories. How, on a medium to long term, can we do that from an extremely global standpoint on all the territory? Because not everyone is subject to the RGA risk and other risks. Definitely, you're right. This is the topic of the day. And Lustman has talked about the topic of insurability, which is being used with more or less success and capacity to do so and to mediatize it. In France today, 97% of the population is being insured. We're not here saying it is not the case on all of the French territories. Some are insured at 50%, other than those at 100%. We don't have 50 solutions. We have the solution to increase the resources, the rate of the over-premium. So the factor, we need to index it, to peg it to inflation. For the last time we have revisited, it was 25 years ago. And if we have provisions to revisit it every quarter of a century, it will not be enough. If our sole strategy to increase the strategy, we will be back against the wall. We're sure about that. Hence, today's topic is there is another way of doing it, i.e. by containing the increase of claims and losses. No other possibility there is but strengthening the prevention policy which exists today. It's not as if nothing happened. There are 400 million euros per annum investments that are earmarked to the prevention, 3/4 of which are the prevention of floods. And on RGA, quite naturally, we have financed zero for the last 20 years. Explaining the floods claims ratio has capped because the prevention was good and powerful. But on the RGA, we have a very ascending curve because it's worrisome, because there has been no policy for the last 20 years. We need to work on prevention. We need to put in more means and to be able to go and find and fetch the individuals. And everyone has said so this morning. Accountability is also on the individual level. And we have public bodies whereby you can be funded by 80 to 80% with those systems, just like a shield preventing water from coming in or to the house. And people also continue to buy, when the state proposes to buy houses to destroy them. So all of these behavioral topics that we need to address. But there's a key topic. I don't know whether it is the case in other countries. But if you adapt your house to this, you would sell it more at a higher price. If you better insulate your house in France, you're going to sell it because you will make economies every day, or savings. For the climate risk adaptation, the incentive for people to do that remains complicated. We need to work on the mapping that you've talked about. In France, we don't have a national mapping. as is the case in the Netherlands, where we know exactly what are the areas that are prone to, not at all prone, and we don't have a consolidated mapping. We have fragmented, piecemeal, for example, floods by running off, you see. So we need to work on that mapping in order to really set up a strategy to know where do we remain, in what conditions, and where are the areas that we have to leave to really do a phase out, and where are we going to continue working willy-nilly, quote-unquote, the human anthropic activities in France. I'll come back to you later, sir, to talk about the role of the CCR in this very context. Christelle, I have a question. It is true that I echo back on this RGA, because these are risks that are in terms of claims, because we need, there is the causal effect, we need to also do a loss or claims declaration, whereby the question of innovation in terms of insurance products and also forecome to an insurance mode which is based on index insurance or the parametric insurance, and that would be interesting to know how is that going to be done, where at a time when we have, which is not the case before, we have the data and the prediction or the forecast is done on a real-time basis with all of the data. Can you tell us, by and large, this very insurance, how does it work first, and how it can contribute to better cover all of these climate risk-related risks? No, the parametric insurance first is related to an objective that is that of having a external parameter or an index. It has to be historically based on swells, floods, drought insurance, cyclones, tornadoes. It could also be a geological index, just like the earthquakes. Three elements are important to have, or necessary to have a parameter or an index, which is going to be steered or piloted by an independent data provider. We need to have a threshold for the triggering of this index, which is going to be determined by a level of coverage in terms of frequency and intensity. And finally, we need to determine ahead of time a quantum of compensation, which is going to be flat or lump sum, which will make it possible to really design the global insurance. By way of passing information on the claims management in a parametric insurance system, there is a triggering of the parameter which will be undertaken versus the reaching of a threshold that we will set prior to that, and a third set threshold will send a report on the event. The customer will make out their loss or claims reporting, and the payment is going to be done automatically in the wake of such declaration/reporting, indeed respecting the indemnity principle. But there would be no need for valuation of the claim, and the compensation takes place a couple of days thereafter. With respect to parametric insurance, I haven't heard you talk about claims or loss. Imagine that we go over a threshold. It's just being triggered. And imagine it could be a threshold of rainfall or a certain degree on the Richter scale. I am being insured under the parametric system. My house still stands firm. What happens there? Well, of course, we will continue with the indemnity principle, but if we have determined in advance the payment or the quantum, we need to really valuate or valorize the losses to benefit by the insurance. Generally, in parametric insurance PI, it is over and above the damage. It could be also financial losses that are in the ecosystem of the event. Rightly so, we have a system which is quite different from conventional insurance. How do we have both cohabit? How can this fit within the conventional, traditional insurance? Well, vis-a-vis the traditional insurance system, you have two things that are going to be differentiating. The traditional insurance its models are being based on historical, chronological data and reactive measures, whereas the PI, parametric insurance, these are information on pertaining to data that are quite advanced. We're going to talk about data science, ML, machine learning. The modeling is being done vis-a-vis the underlying phenomena. In other words, better understanding the physical risks as such. This better understanding of the physical risk makes it possible to better learn and know the climatic realities that are, of course, dynamic and changing. The major difference is in the very understanding of the climate phenomena on a daily basis and for the future. Do you have any examples to share with us? I imagine that this is a type of insurance that can be extremely practical for emergent countries. Any different examples in mind that you can share with us? In point of fact, for the emergent countries, there is we're looking for such coverage because it will cover mostly high intensity risks, whereby we will be looking into those areas with difficulties to cover their risks and to get insured. But the fact is, with the sturdier or robust models, we will be able to determine coverage levels that are really bespoke and adapted to those zones exactly. Let me use the example that we put in place with the government of Djibouti in 23. We have entered a manual and multi-risk with the African risk capacity. The aim being to beef up the management of catastrophic risks, and it has participated to the designing of the coverage under two parameters. The first parameter was the drought parameter. Since Djibouti is a country which is arid and without any water sources, surface water sources, with a pastoral, nomadic breeders that are moving according to the rainfall and the availability of the fodder, and we therefore our indices have been made according to the rainfall, to the deficit of hygrometry or humidity of the hedaphic conditions of the soil conditions. We've also put in place another parameter. This is a multi-risk. We've talked about swells and floods, and in Djibouti there are intense flash floods on a short lapse of time that lead to devastating swells, and we've covered that risk, which essentially is centered on the city of Djibouti, because 60% of the population of Djibouti live in the Djibouti capital city. And we have also seen that there is a coastal, very high risky situation in coast areas with an underwriting which is quite the niche or specialized, and our underwriters have gone there to analyze the situation. There's a mapping, therefore, which has been set up. The case of Jamaica, isn't it, was also recently distributed over different levels of rainfall per region. I'll come back to you. But in the meantime, I know I would like to ask you the following question. Whether insurance and climate change, is it or not part of the IARDs, the sundry risks, the fire, etc.? Certainly not, because since this morning we have been hearing about IARD insurance. We have to understand that the climate risk affects the humans in their health, in their professional activities, and there is an impact on its lifespan. We have participated to the first stress test and the second stress test of the CPR, the French regulatory body, to measure and to quantify the impact not only of a heat wave on the mortality of the elderly, but also this, we'll have to understand, includes all of the age brackets and all countries, since with a dark days or heat wave during the summer and large conurbations with high automobile or motor traffic, this is the case for many a country. During this heat wave, the atmospheric pollution is going to take place, everything having to the polluters, the PM10, PM2.5, that are the fine particle pollution. This will develop, and the persons will develop all of the airborne diseases, asthma, including the young, not only the elderly, but also the young ones. And this is public knowledge. Asthma is the first factor of comorbidity. It was, at least during the COVID-19, which boils down to saying what? The same COVID will come back in 10 years from now if there is nothing undertaken in terms of reduction of atmospheric pollutions in these large cities, megacity. Impact, death-wise, on the population would be totally different, much more impactful, much more noxious than the COVID. And this will impact not only the elderly, but all those persons who have contracted respiratory distress problems. So this is a challenge. Now, this challenge requires what? To be able to modify, to change all of the models, all of the assumptions, the hypotheses based on which we work, including in nature, to put a tariff and put a fee on all of the life insurance products. In other words, this is not only the job of the public powers and interests, but also us to be able to change the tools and the models with which we use, the assumptions that we use. They are already biased or skewed, and we have to, alas, we have to also imagine the different futures with or without action in RCP 8.5 or other scenarios. But we have to factor in this volatility, and we have to account for the correlations of different risks. Going from 12 to 20% on the premiums, yeah, you've mentioned that, but I'm asking you, Arnaud, are we doomed to? Are we a solution to increase the premiums, be it of insurance or reinsurance, to be able to face the whole things coming? No, we are not condemned as life insurance specialists. We can act. One of the first actions is that there's not only the overpricing, or the increase in the premium, there would be one. So instead of trying to vote a refeeing each euro that would have put in an increased fee could be invested and plowed back in prevention. That is very important. The return on a premium is going to be lesser than it is the prevention, the investment in prevention. And we haven't yet made it there. And we try to develop and devise with our reinsurance partners, devise reinsurance schemes where in the fee of reinsurance, the action of the cessors or the companies that sell. There's not only the stick, there's the carrot too. Nicolas. Let me come back on the CCR. What can, in the future, CCR's role be against the backdrop that we have just, and thank you for having really clearly depicted it quickly. What can the CCR's role be over and above the role that it discharges of? The first role of CCR, apart from the public reinsurer, is to be advisory, to advise the public powers, the government, the central state, the local governments, to give advisory services to insurers on the basis of what it has been able to implement models-wise for the last 20 years. Some in this room know that and can do that, and I would pay tribute to them to really shed more light on this. We're talking since this morning of uncertainty. We need to make projections and forecasts. And if we don't really see clearly these things, we don't really know how to work. So we really need to make this clearer to the Treasury in France department, or be it the Ministry of Ecology that proposes public prevention policies. Concretely, we're going to assess the efficiency of some systems. In France, we have that formidable tool, which is the French IRS? No, tax authority, not a risk prevention plan, RPP. At a conurbation area, appoint those non-constructive areas non-edificandi areas. So it covers 90% of the zones and the areas, and we have measured the efficiency of such plans. They are difficult to implement. When you make it to a local area and you say to a mayor, Mr. Madam Mayor, you cannot build anymore, non-edificandi, and you have a plot of land, you cannot sell it because it becomes again constructible. So these plans have been criticized.
This requires peace because you can't go it alone. You start make sure these things tie with each other. We need to insist on PPPs. In terms of financial insurance, for example, we have three rules which have been identified where some states, for instance, for the Caribbean and Central America, which is focused on hurricanes, the ARC with the Pan-African body for the mutualization of risks on floods and floodings, but also a body for the Asia-Pacific area. So all those risks have been identified with the support of public authorities, with the help of specialized insurers who coordinate the efforts of players with structuring the offers and capitalization. As far as we're concerned, we have an expertise in modeling, in machine learning, and in specialized coverage in data science. On this, what we can say is that for a public-private partnership on the government side, there is a need to have a mitigation and adaptation strategy which is strong in order to strike a balance between prevention and risk management in case of disasters. Yes, it's important to have models, to be forward-looking, to have a vision on the development of risks in health, in leaves of absence, in a changing paradigm. And this puts into question our vision on the part of what is systemic and what is not systemic. We know that events will grow in frequency. This is a general trend, but this trend is becoming stronger. and this compounds the risks, which means we need to redefine our practices, our models, and our prices, what we are willing to insure as insurance companies. So it's very important to redefine our fundamentals, the part of risks that needs to be insured, and what needs to be covered by national solidarity or a pooling system. Thank you so much, Nicolas, Patrice, Arnaud. And now we'll move on to our second discussion panel. As I have said, we will listen to feedbacks in the face of uncertainties related to earthquakes. Bashir Badou will be with us. He's a Director General of CAT and Deputy Vice President of FMA. Please join us, Bashir. And please welcome Nicolas Moignet, Regional Director for International Products and Practices at Gallagher Ray. Please give him a round of applause. Mr. Andreas Pohlmann, Manager of Reinsurance Activities, Non-Life for the Middle East and North Africa at Munich Re, and Mr. Abdullah Nassif, Director for the Management of Natural Hazards at the Ministry of the Interior. Please take your seats. You'll have mics. Welcome. As I've said in the introduction, we were strongly affected and hit in Morocco on the 8th of September last. The emotion is still strong, but we're working on ways in which we can deal with the repercussions of the earthquake. Predictions for earthquakes are based on seismic areas. Earthquakes are now announced with a very tight timing. And it all ties into concepts such as mitigation, prevention, and adaptation, with varying considerations based on the different cases. Mr. Abdullah, I'll start with you. And I'll ask you a very simple question. Can we consider today that Morocco is a country that is more prone to natural disasters? Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to take part in this discussion. Indeed, Morocco, because of its geographic position, its geology, is more prone to extreme natural events, but also to natural disasters. Admittedly, with climate change, today we are facing something that goes beyond climate change, because change, by definition, is going from one situation to another. But we are not in that context now. We are not going from one situation to another. We are facing a climate breakdown. And nowadays, experts, be they IPCC experts or from academia, they talk about a breakdown. Even in a sole country, you can have areas which are facing flooding risks and others facing droughts. And they can change, those risks can change from an area to another over the months. And of course, Morocco is facing risk. It is vulnerable according to different risks. Take, for example, tsunamis. Morocco is vulnerable. This is a severe risk that needs to be taken into account, and we are currently working on this at the moment. We are conducting studies to have a risk mapping. The risks are there. Since the 1955 Lisbon earthquake, we are aware that tsunamis can hit Larache, Safi, and other areas were affected, and marks are still visible. As a consequence, we are also vulnerable to a certain number of risks and extreme events. In the case of Al Hawz earthquake, it has shown us a vulnerability in an area in which risks were not deemed high. This, for example, is not the case for the Rif area, where risks with geological movements stand at a high level. So this area is vulnerable, it will remain so, but our work is to work on anticipation. Yes, so this brings me to my question. What is currently being done in policy making? Because awareness raising is not new, but with all what we've been facing, what is going on? What is currently taking place in Morocco? Following the Al Hoceima earthquake in 2004, and based on a royal speech back in March 2004, pronounced by His Majesty the King, may God assist him, he spoke very candidly to Moroccans, and he said that Morocco was ill-prepared for such situations. So from that point on, we started working, and we put in place a number of projects, starting with an integrated program for risk management, the main purpose of which was to go from crisis management to anticipation. And based on that, we worked on a certain number of important pillars. The first one is an institutional pillar, governance, and from there we developed a national strategy for risk management with implementation action plans. We created a body for the coordination and the steering of risk management at the national level, because before each stakeholder worked in silo. There was no coordination, no exchange of experiences and expertise in that regard. So a body was created at the Ministry for the Interior, and we put in place a certain number of actions whose goal is to strengthen the anticipation aspect. We also worked on prevention. Prevention is paramount. A fund for the fight against natural disasters was created in 2009. At the beginning, it focused on rebuilding and refurbishing, but starting from 2014, we started working on prevention, and between 2015 and now, we have been able to co-finance almost 300 projects to the tune of 4.5 billion dirhams. And this fund contributed to a third of that sum. Other players have taken part, ministerial departments, local authorities, public and government bodies. And based on that, protection and prevention projects are being implemented. We can see their importance, their efficiency in a certain number of extreme events such as floodings. The first risk, so to speak, is the flooding risk at the national level. And with these projects, we are now able, and we have been able, to avoid floodings thanks to that. In addition, and given that zero risk does not exist, Morocco with the help of all related departments and with the help of the Insurance Federation, Morocco put in place a coverage system to prevent disastrous events and created a solidarity fund. So all people, all policy holders are covered and protected from catastrophic events, and those not covered by insurance policies, be they Moroccan people or tourists, they can also be covered if they experience damages. They can be covered by the Solidarity Fund if they don't have an insurance policy. So many projects are underway, and all this is taking place as part of the national strategy and as part of the action plans. Maybe we can discuss again, we can talk about the earthquake. Yes, we'll get back to that. Mr. Bashir, from the insurance sector standpoint, how has the industry structured to face that kind of risks? Thank you, Faisal. The first important thing, and much has been said this morning, as far as we're concerned in the insurance sector, one of the requirements that we have added to our discussions with the public authorities before we created this scheme is the compulsory nature of the scheme. To put in place such coverage, there must be a compulsory component. And we're not accustomed to that. Without that, we wouldn't have been able to ensure large penetration rate. So how do we go about controlling this coverage? This can be done by the police, and this ensures a wider coverage. And we found ways to ensure everyone is covered by adding that additional guarantee, this compulsory guarantee in all damage insurance policies. Today in Morocco, whatever the policy type, for civil or car liability, you can find this guarantee. So starting from that, after adding this compulsory guarantee, we saw that cars, for example, are not covered, but we can cover the owner, their relatives, their children, in the case of bodily damages. And this is important in the case of earthquakes, for example. People with cars or motor vehicles, if you have car insurance, you are covered if someone passes away, for example, or is injured. The same goes for home insurance. So we have succeeded with our discussions with public authorities to structure coverage in Morocco. And this is the feedback we are trying to share with our African or Arab or Asian counterparts. So you need to take time before building such a scheme. So we have also been supported by reinsurers, and some of them is here with us. They have helped us significantly, and we need to factor in a certain number of key elements. First, compulsory coverage. Second, control insurance. And third, set limits. We can't say, for example, that someone living in some areas with a house with a 60 million value, we can't say that we insure only a part of that. And there are buildings as well. There are key buildings in Casablanca that are valued at hundreds of millions. There are limitations of guarantees. There are also optional guarantees. So this is very important feedback for us. So first, we need to have a compulsory coverage, and second, we need to be able to control insurance, and third, there needs to be limitations. But the sector needs to organize in order to structure coverage in a kind of a pool. And I'm speaking as a vice president of the federation, but I also speak for the CAT. The insurance sector markets the guarantees, so the risks are handed over to the CAT in a reinsurance scheme. So insurance company keep a small fraction of the risk, and we negotiated with public authorities to centralize the insurance commitment. It was an important point. So we were told to keep a part of the risk. There was no question of doing fronting. So the CAT centralizes reinsurance in a significant way, and then it goes to RASR, who is a national reinsurer, which covers a part of that risk. Thank God, and unfortunately for those living in the affected areas, Marrakech was affected. Some 4,000 buildings were compensated. We compensated 8,000 units in Marrakech. If Marrakech had been hit, the insurance sector would have been able to step in. Yes, following on the Al Haouz earthquake, as we've seen as Moroccans, we saw that private companies, the public sector, the authorities, the military, the national security agency, everybody intervened to respond to this extremely complex earthquake. And some foreign media simplified things and painted the picture in a very peculiar way. I wanted to remind that. But as insurers, how did you organize in the wake of the earthquake? The earthquake was not unprecedented. There was Al Husima before. But in Al Haouz earthquake, there was kind of a shock. How did you organize as insurers? The earthquake happened at 11 p.m. and my friend, the Deputy Director General at CAT, contacted me at 11:30. I was contacted by the governor to better understand the scale of damages. We organized a crisis committee the day after, and in the afternoon we gathered all the insurance sector to begin organizing and structuring our response. We didn't know the scale of the damages. We didn't know what our commitment would be, but we wanted, and we felt very strongly about taking responsibility. You wouldn't believe that the summer before September 2023, in July 2023, we tested a platform that we had developed to manage an earthquake. And with the team, we might not use that platform, or we might use it in some 30 or 40 years. But thankfully, the platform had been tested by insurance companies with the CAT as an aggregator. And from the next Monday, the platform was operational. It had to be tweaked because when you're confronted with real events with a platform that has not been deployed in the past, things can be tricky. But we worked with our reinsurer partners, with other countries. So we were very, very responsive. And sometimes we are criticized. They say, yeah, the cost was only 450 million dirhams. And I say, yes, it's the case, because the areas in which insured people lived were not affected. We could have reached 3 billion dirhams. Yes, how did you manage this, Mr. Abdullah? Yes, as Bashir said, when we prepared all the coverage scheme with a platform for identifying victims, registries, and all of that, we were not prepared 100%. We were expecting a limited event, as with the Al Hoceima earthquake, with only one area affected, or what we saw with the floodings in the Gharb and Casablanca regions. Unfortunately, in the first exercise, we faced something that was beyond what we had expected. It was unexpected in terms of scale. 6 provinces affected, and secondly, the orography of the area affected. It was a very difficult area to access, but the earthquake in itself was very severe, 5 on the Richter scale. This is significant for the affected areas, but thank God the damages were not as high as they could have been. If the epicenter had been closer to the city, if it had been closer to Casablanca, maybe we would have faced another situation. But mountains played a buffer role, so to speak, in terms of magnitude, and therefore the damages and the death toll were not as significant as they could have been. It's worth noting that the event took place on the 9th of September at 11 past 11 p.m. On the 9th, there was a meeting presided by His Majesty the King. May God assist him. The first meeting was about emergency measures, the creation of an inter-ministerial commission for the following and creation of a fund to gather the necessary credits to face the situation. The second meeting was presided by His Majesty the King on the 14th, and in that case we started working on rehousing people and on financial aid. And the last meeting, the third meeting that took place on the 20th, it was about a development plan for the whole area. So there were takeaways, there were lessons learned very quickly, and this has allowed us to prepare the area for the future. There was also a support and interventions that are worth reminding. Selfless interventions by law enforcement authorities, civil protection authorities, public authorities, local authorities, associations. Everybody started working immediately to deal with emergency, with on-the-ground hospitals, with food provision. So all this was taken care of rapidly. It was not anarchical. And this is a takeaway. What's also worth noting is that given the importance of the event and the damages, the areas affected, if we hadn't had this royal intervention, maybe the system alone would not have been sufficient. The Solidarity Fund alone wouldn't have been able to rebuild all affected houses. So there was a special fund which is now responsible for construction as a whole, but also for the development of the whole area.
Voilà, je vais vous poser.
Merci, thank you, Nicola. A question, in the light of what we've heard and in a more general manner and all of the earthquake, we'll talk about that of Turkey in a moment. What does this teach us as to our behavior vis-a-vis this type of seismic action? Did it change? What does it teach us on our own behavior? I mean, our being the insurance sector. So this is very illustrative in relation to the risk. This is an explosive. Can you please speak closer to the microphone? So far as the frequency is very weak on the scale of several generations, we can forget exposure to claim, to damage, but when they occur, can be devastating. So it's quite human, but of course we tend to forget. Yeah. And this can last several generations, and we may forget. So we start building where we shouldn't be building, and we're not protecting because, yeah, I'm 47. Of course, the one that remained in my mind is that of Mexico. And we can think of risks that are less frequent, just like the pandemics. The individual decision-making level is not maybe the right one. We need to have a super-individual level. We need to involve the authorities through PPP, as we have seen in Morocco and in Turkey, as well as in Taiwan, with a very recent seismic action. We should not forget that the first insurance contract was created in the 13th century in Genoa. So this is the origin of the insurance between the 13th and the 21st century, 8 centuries during which, Genoa being in Italy, the penetration of insurance for earthquakes in Italy is only 1 to 2%. So the president of the federation was talking about 4% from Morocco, and he thought it was weak. In Italy, a European country with a long insurance tradition, but Bashir related that insurance culture, even in those countries, just like Italy, it is not very much insured against. So this means that the model for development of the risk transfer through individual decision, which is a Western-style development model, is not the sole, certainly not best adapted model for those countries who are at the very beginning of their activities. If we needed to compare the two earthquakes from a reinsurance standpoint, that of Turkey and that of Al House, we can also add that of Taiwan. The reaction of the reinsurance market have been very, very different. We could start with Turkey, where the market was disorganized by the earthquake because it was not part of the models. Talking about risk, we are basing mathematical models that represents the intensity and the frequency of the earthquakes. The system works well. The setting of the fee is adequate, and the size of the coverage is enough insofar as the model making it possible does represent truly the reality. And of course we can make the difference between these different earthquakes on the basis of that criteria. And of course in Turkey it was not a earthquake, it was a succession of major earthquakes over a 3-week period. So it was out of the model. In other words, overnight, the vision of the need of coverage has drastically changed, whereby we have gone from needs for coverage for all of the country of $3 billion to $4.5 billion. So we had to go fetch in the capitals of the insurance, go fetch, including Munich Re, of $1.5 billion. Well, it is worth recalling that $729 million is the reinsurance market, so they needed 1.5 on top of that. But these are outliers, very, very individual cases. Some insurance have gone their protection by threefold, 300%, which speaks volume about the work with the brokers. It's a completely disorganized market in Turkey. Capacity-wise, we had to buy 50% more, and at the same time, the prices have increased by 100%. So I think Andreas will certainly not belie me with prices in Turkey that were very low. For those who are interested, we had return lines of 0.3% and a minimum return line of 2%, which is quite classical. So we have had a 7. These are prices and fees are normal prices for cat covers. A thoroughly disorganized market in Turkey, whereas in Morocco, the Al Hawz earthquake, even Abdullah have mentioned it, it occurred in an area where we did not expect to see frequent earthquakes. But the models showed weak frequency, yes, but earthquakes in this area. And I still recollect, and you would you remember that the earthquake took place only in Monte Carlo the day after we were at Monte Carlo with the Munich Re teams, and he were telling us that the earthquake was within the models and there was no change in the vision according to what we have seen in Turkey. So it was quite a normal renewal because it was already included in the fees. So we noted an evolution in adjusted risks of more than 10%, which is what we have been able to see the world over. So there was quite a normal trend for the insurance system. For the non-insurance scheme in Morocco, this is a pride for the country on the parametric insurance of the Solidarity Fund. The prices and the fees have gone drastically up. But again, quite modestly, I would add that you are coming from a long way. In other words, the conditions set up by the market then were very low, so there has been a readjustment that has led to a very difficult period to live. But insofar as there is mathematically or arithmetically speaking a return to normal, if you allow me to finish with Taiwan, and I wanted to talk about this. It does depict well how we can improve things. And according to what we've said this morning, it was a terrible earthquake in 1999 in Taiwan, and it is they were not protected, and the penetration rate was extremely low, and constructions were not adapted, and that the constructive codes were not adapted, and even the buildings did not abide by the code and the law, which led to real scandals. And we found also waste and oil drums to stabilize, used rather than cement. A lot of regulation, a lot of action taken, suits. But in Morocco, we have a PPP that covers minimally.
Et puis, la mise en place également.
Plus, the setup of an early warning system that makes it possible to apprise the population a couple of seconds before the earthquake hits. A comment very important, physically speaking. We were fortunate that it was on the East Coast, which is the coast which does not host all of the semiconductors industry, which is westwards, close to Taipei. Don't believe too much in the pictures and the photos, because most journalists, of course, were close to the building that tilted, if I may say, just like in Marrakesh in September. Everyone was taking pictures of the mosque, whereas Marrakesh was not hard hit. As far as reinsurance is concerned, there would be no consequences. There were only 9 fatalities, but the major earthquakes of 1999 with the same Richter scale has had a total of 3,000 fatalities, which explains the resiliency of the Taiwanese population in over 25, and the resilience / adaptation. Andreas.
Thank you very much.
All right. So it might be a very simplest question, but we're going to talk about the uncertainty of an earthquake event and the way we assess that kind of event. So what are the main sources of uncertainty? Because we know that insurance is trying to make certain uncertainty. So, and how do we prepare to manage this uncertainty?
Thank you, Faisal. Bonsoir, Casablanca, and my compliments go to the translators. Great job, gentlemen, because I heard you saying, Nicolas, that reinsurers are difficult, or were difficult in the market.
Vous pouvez applaudir les traducteurs, c'est vrai que... Hein,
Thank you very much, sir. Yeah, thank you, thank you.
Yes, Faisal, thank you very much for the question. You see from the dynamic of this panel discussion that the reinsurer is the last in the food chain, no complaints. But this is the normal situation we're in, and that's why, of course, we're playing the role that we're playing. And this is being aware that the buck stops with us and living probably with the biggest amount of uncertainty. By having the least transparency than the gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen in the room, and the gentlemen here on the panel. So what do we do when we as reinsurers allocate money and capital for risk that is uncertain? First of all, luckily, reinsurers, at least the few that are around for quite a while, have a long memory. If we don't have a long memory, we have a good access to data. So we try to look at, first of all, the hazard itself. Maybe next year, Bashir, we talk about floods, because it's also an interesting topic, but let's hope no flood hits Casablanca. Earthquake is the subject. So when we look at the earthquake as a hazard, of course, we try to understand simply from a scientific point of view, what is the situation? What is the performance of the soil? What's the location? What's the seismic exposure? Stuff like this. This helps a lot, of course, to understand, or at least to somehow quantify return periods and to understand the hazard better. This is much easier said than done, because we pay good salaries to specialists, geologists, to try to, nothing else than 24/7 apply their mind around such situations or such facts actually in scientific situations. And not only in Morocco, but also in Morocco and also worldwide, of course, since our business model by nature is worldwide. So first of all, very simple, like every good insurer, understand the risk. Secondly, how we try to manage the uncertainty is then look into vulnerability, and actually many of the aspects have been said before. And if Richard Wording is still in the room, my regards again. I think he gave a fantastic keynote, which is actually summarizing what I'm referring to as well. Vulnerability, what is the amount of, or the number of people that is affected based on the scientific know-how that we built? What is the number of businesses and houses and commercial entities? And what is their respective values at the end of the day? Those are the 3 aspects. When I was saying that the scientific work to understand the hazard is quite complicated, in the first place, it's supposed to be more easy to understand what is the location of people, what is the location of businesses, and what is the respective value. And here our dear clients come into play. And when you were saying that you were excellently prepared, my credit, my personal credit, and also as representative of, as a reinsurer, goes to Morocco and goes to all the companies that contributed to handle the event. Preparation and risk mitigation is the only thing that helps to fight the uncertainty. From a governmental point of view, governments have to take or they are actually actively or inactively taking the decision whether to pay after the event, which is usually very costly, or to invest way less funds into risk mitigation. And this is exactly what happened. And the country, and you gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, you saw the benefit and the credit of your mitigation measures and the preparation. Forgive me, it's probably the right place to say, but I'm quoting Morocco, or the Moroccan insurance industry, as the role model in the area, geographical area where I'm responsible for, Middle East and North Africa, as the role model how to do it right. Again, this is the right place to say, but it's the truth. Examples are currently happening, and Nicola knows similar situations in Oman, and also Egypt is following through. So again, I cannot credit the insurance industry in Morocco and all the entities involved enough for doing what they have been doing, because when the moment of truth came, things worked, luckily. And now to round it up, the question, Faisal, was how to manage uncertainty from a reinsurer who's far, far away. I mean, not too far, but further away than obviously the local market. Having partners in the market who simply do their homework, who understand what are the vulnerabilities, where are the values, where are the people, where are the assets, based on the scientific model, and then act on it by preparing for the event. This gives the confidence to the reinsurer to provide money or capital by means of reinsurance into places where we feel this is the place where risk is understood and where we can manage the uncertainty.
And what is the role of reinsurance in the post-event management? I mean, to manage all the aftermath and all the consequences.
It may sound a bit academic, but similar to the preparation before the event, also post the event, is to encourage our partners. I'm not necessarily referring to Morocco, but generally speaking, worldwide speaking, to encourage our partners to maybe do three things. First of all, to continue the high level of preparation and risk mitigation. The next event, hopefully, is 100 years away after the event, but nobody knows, it can happen tomorrow again. So to keep the discipline and continue managing the risk, managing the uncertainty, number one. Number two, such drastic events, as sad and tragic as they are, they have an effect in the mentality and the minds of the people, because they create a lot of awareness. And while insurance is very boring until you need it, people suddenly can observe at the front door what is the benefit of the financial asset and institution of insurance. So increasing the penetration by attracting people to buy insurance, even more, this is a secondary element. And the academic part that reinsurers usually do, if they're good, is of course to stay in touch with the counterparts in the country, insurance industry, see what new information in terms of assessing the hazard are there. Nicola made a comment to that extent. In the case of Morocco, the specialists are saying there's no change in the model, but this can be different. They can be, or events can lead to a drastic change in the modeling, which then in turn can have a change into risk mitigation. So consulting clients or the market about what is actually the scientific effect, and then translating it into action again, maybe also changing reinsurance structures, consulting clients on that end, this is what we then do. I'm very happy that in Morocco, if you want, this is not necessary. Despite this tragic event, it's still, I mean, compared to other tragic events, in proportion, again, thanks to the excellent preparation of the markets.
How are the losses regarded? Are they regarded as as we say in French, force majeure? You know, force majeure losses, and what are the relevant aspects of that we have to consider around secondary perils after an earthquake event?
Again, not necessarily only referring to Morocco. I mean, obviously, earthquakes or floods are an act of nature, act of God. To that end, they are of course a force majeure. I think you asked the question, Faisal, to what extent are the losses the consequence of a force majeure? The event as such is, certainly. The losses is something that humans can manage and should manage. And this is what I said before. Again, my credit or my reference to the keynote speaker. The Netherlands is a fantastic country. If you have the chance, go there, but don't miss to pass by in Germany on your way back to Morocco. But this is a very sophisticated, educated country. When the Netherlands were shipping the oceans, Germans were still living on trees. Maybe I'm exaggerating a bit, but he said the risk, in this case the flood, is not insurable. Oh, sorry, halas, we cannot. This is what he said several times. I mean, One needs to actually digest this. This is a very mature country saying, sorry, we cannot. We cannot insure. So financial instruments don't help. Coming back to your question, still I have this in mind. What are they doing? They're building dams, they're building walls, they're building all sorts of somehow man-made defenses against this force majeure to avoid losses. And this is what they are doing. And their country is, he showed the map, whatever, 1/3, 2/3 below the sea level, which is very easy. From a hazard scientific point of view, this is easy to see. But what they're doing is they're avoiding losses in the first place, risk mitigation. And this is the answer to your question, Faisal. Try your utmost best to protect from harm that nature can bring. Same applies to secondary perils. I think you mentioned it, again, thanks to the translator, tsunamis, landslides, unfortunately also can happen very frequently. Also, this is part of the modeling, by the way, when reinsurers or other entities analyze models, analyze hazards. What is the secondary perils? Very famous, unfortunately, in Japan, where tsunamis are quite frequent. And from what we saw in Fukushima, it can be really disastrous. Again, also taking secondary perils into account and not only the primary peril, thinking actually 2 steps further, and then again also taking the mitigation measures into account to manage secondary perils. This is what can be done to mitigate losses.
Merci, Andreas. Thank you so much. Merci à vous. Time's up. J'avais en plus à vous poser, mais
maybe 2 to 3 questions, but I think we have come to the end of this panel. Thank you for the panelists, and thank you for your enlightening. Wait a certain number of elements we're now going to.
Assurance maritime.
Now to go to maritime insurance facing the ESG impact, environmental, social, and governmental. And with me, applaud Mr. Frederick de Naffel, who is the president of DMI. Garex, thank you for being with us. Thank you, Frederick. James Amos, Master Mariner, CNN, France AXA XL. And Mr. Ahmed Dawood, director of the research center at the Suez Canal Authority.
Translation headset, because we're going to speak in French right now, but we'll speak in English with you in a while. So on va essayer de faire ça en 30 minutes. Vous êtes que 3, donc normalement
No, since we're only 3 here, we could do that in 30 minutes. It's a topic that is extremely interesting. And I was saying that to Mr. Dowell a moment ago. I was fortunate to learn about the job of maritime pilots, and it is not the subject here at hand, but it would also be a segue to comment on the impact that that can have on the Suez Canal when it was blocking all the world trade, sea lanes. Let me start with you, Frédéric. One can ask a question as to how today the maritime insurers are or feel concerned with the climate change. First, I'm keen on thanking the organizer of this conference to allow us to air our thoughts on this topic. I'd like to respond to your question. The maritime insurers are directly confronted to the consequences of the climate change / the regulation. From a maritime standpoint, this has been materialized by landslides, by tsunamis, by exceptional intensity, tornadoes, cyclones. This can affect the goods and the shipments and hence disorganize the transport chain in a very deepest fashion. Maritime insurers aware of such risks have asked themselves about the best methods to prevent or to preclude from them happening. There are several possibilities, but insofar as we are interested in the causes thereof, we come back again on the global warming itself, triggered or caused by the CO2 sequestration in the environment, and the atmosphere, immediately the idea dawns on us as to how to reduce this carbon footprint, generally speaking, most particularly for the sea lane transport, which is the culprit of 3% of greenhouse gas. If you try and compare that, it stands for the production of GHGs of a country the likes of Germany. On an annual basis, there is something that certainly must lead us to think, which is a small, quote-unquote, industrial country, Germany. When's the question? In what conditions the maritime insurance would have to have their fair share of the message, inciting the ship owners to adapt their working tools of their ships to participate in the reduction of the GHG, greenhouse gases. Of course, we're not the only ones to have a role to play. We have an emblematic role to discharge of. Insofar as every time an insurer insures a shipment, they encourage the use of a ship. So the ship must be seaworthy and up to the standards that aim to reduce the GHG's emissions. The first reason was to say we need to accompany this international movement of GHG emission reduction insofar as the transport participates in causing this climate deregulation. So how can we act? This is how and why the maritime insurers today are worried about that. On top of that, we can reconcile that with the evolution of technologies aimed at reducing the GHGs with a better, secure, insured risks harnessing, an improvement of the results pertaining to maritime insurance. And here there is a whole plethora of technology, myriad of technologies that can be implemented that are being analyzed currently to allow a reduction of both GHGs, but also the future will tell, to reduce a form of claims and loss ratio that are the subject of a lot of attention of the insurers. So if we can hit two birds with one stone, improve the visibility of the risks and improve the situation of the losses related thereto, we will be, of course, preserving the planet and will be having the best of both worlds. Now, the loss in maritime, which is with the claim, I think imagination is exceeded by reality. The last claim or loss that we have read in the headlines is the Baltimore Bridge Earl that was of a hitherto unprecedented amplitude or magnitude. This is one of the ones that we would like to avoid. But other claims, other losses are the ones related to conflictual situations that could trigger blockings. And we will be able to talk about it. There are several cases thereof, and this is quite particularly worrisome for maritime insurers, who are also war risk insurers. So this is what we can say to justify that.
Let's get back to the environment. Have you observed changes at that level linked to energy transition, and since when? Yes, this, of course, has been the case. Ship owners and seafarers are very sensitive to environmental impacts, and this has been so for a long time. We can mention two important aspects that had a significant impact on ships, Amarpol and its Schedule 6, adopted in 2005, which dealt with pollution and fumes from ships. It was about nitrate dioxide mainly, and nitrogen. And there was another chapter on the yield of motors. This is a more technical part. But since the 2000s, there has been a transition. After 2015, we can't talk about energy transition without mentioning the Paris Agreement and decarbonization. All those changes have become visible in the industry, in the insurance sector. All these innovations had to be taken into account with our customers. Some innovations are older than others. The scrubbers, for example, the filters. This is more about retrofitting. So we take a ship or a floating asset and we add a filter. And there were other projects from the bidding process. And the sky is the limit in that regard. And I am proud to have taken part in some of the projects with our clients, micro projects or micro structure projects to reduce GHG emissions with a reduction of 10%, some paints, ship paints with 8% reductions. There are also analyses and new technologies used for the design of ships with the propellers, for example, with significant efficiency gains. So those are changes which are no longer just about hulls. We're talking about new methods of propulsion, sails, for example. And here we're talking about around 40% of GHG emission reduction. So this is today's reality, and I'm delighted to take part in all of that. Another interesting point, and it's also been supported by local authorities and governments, it's the land aspect, the land part, the power supply in ports, being able to connect the ship to the grid, and especially when the grid is greener, this has an impact on GHG emissions. If you don't have a power-ready port, it doesn't work. Yes, the Marseille harbor has done significant work on that, and a certain number of ships have benefited from that, and this allows us to localize the pollution. Frédéric, when it comes to the way in which insurers are committing to the fight against climate change and to the environment. Of course, ethics can change from one party to another, but are there regulations? Are there standards in the current situation that allows you to step up your mitigation efforts and environment protection efforts? Yes, there are texts which have significant incentives. Those texts were issued by the International Maritime Organization, which set a road, the decarbonization of shipping, the target being zero carbon production by 2050. This is a clear objective, and all actors have begun to work to achieve that goal. So a total decarbonation of all shipping, this is extremely ambitious, and this requires awareness raising. It requires significant technological developments, but also massive investments. It also requires control mechanisms. We need to try and depart from the beaten tracks, from announce effects. We need to be practical, and we need to understand where we stand compared to that objective. This decarbonation is accompanied by other texts to support all stakeholders in the chain value in order to gather information, and this allows us to control the degree of achievement of that goal. So a certain number of players have signed the Poseidon Principle for marine insurance. So the PPMI is a voluntary commitment signed by a certain number of maritime insurers and reinsurers, which are specialized in maritime risk. And this concerns commercial ships. So they require the ship owners to report their energy consumption in order to control year on year how that consumption evolves, how it is transformed so as to participate in GHG emission reduction. So this is a voluntary approach which supplements a regulatory international approach from the IMO, but there are also regional bodies such as the EU, which step in on the financial level. And a regulation was adopted whereby maritime insurers will have to report their reduction efforts within their business, be it through their business or through the business they insure. So this regulation is already in place. It was launched this year. It aims to implement a transparency obligation which needs to be respected by insurers. They need to demonstrate that they are in that reduction trajectory. So there is the Corporate Sustainability Directive. So that's another acronym, and it imposes a detailed analysis of the way in which we measure our insurance business as part of this decarbonation ambition, and how we help our customers go in the same direction. So it will be a very comprehensive financial report. It will not just be about figures, it will also be about a narrative. So it will be an additional incentive on the regulatory level. So to some, there is an international context with the IMO, voluntary approaches with the PPMI, but also financial approaches at the regional level with European initiatives. There's also a system applying to shipping, the exchange trading system adopted this year, the purchase and exchange of polluting rights. It applies to ship owners that stop in Europe. They will have to monitor and control their GHG production when they cross Europe. So there will be a kind of carbon exchange, if you will. Talking about PPMI, James, can you tell us about the state of the market? And how do insurers support ship owners in that regard? So, as a reminder, if we are to measure, if we are to control, we need to measure. So this is the objective, as mentioned by Frédéric. So we started gathering data, because AXA XL is part of this effort. So we started gathering data with since 2023, and today consolidations and reports are being issued. So this is the starting point, the zero level, if you will, of the situation. This is the first part where are gathering such data. So the important thing for insurers is not the current outcomes, but how things develop, how we will work in the future. And this will allow us to better support this transition and better support the energy transition. In terms of support, we're not just talking about measures such as the PPMI, and I will mention what Andreas said. We need to be proactive. We need to step in at the beginning of technological changes in ship owners. Today, all these changes, all these technological shifts are a modification of insured hazards. For example, recently we witnessed new ships with sails, so we had to adapt to this new technology. So does this change the insured hazard? What are the pros and cons? We can cite a technical example. For example, around 30% of propulsion will be supported by this technology. So will the hazard be modified? Each insurer will have their own conclusions, but there is also more specific support on emissions, and there is a product AXA is offering their customers as part of a large motor policy. We can cover emissions in excess in the case of disasters with when there is more pollution for repairs, for example. So in support, there is no single solution. There is a whole set of different innovations, be they for the insurers or for harbors with power supply or new technologies for ships. Thank you, Frédéric. Now we'll move on to the more strategic passage in the world, the Suez Canal.
I got 3 questions for you, and very interesting to see how this very so much important spot in the world that is Suez Canal. So can you briefly tell us what's the role of the Suez Canal in supporting international maritime trade in the world? And specifically, to come to our topic, how does the canal contribute to reduce the greenhouse gas emission? Mr. Darus, so please use your microphone. Thank you.
Thank you very much for giving me this contribute in this panel. First of all, I want to say that Suez Canal play an important role.
Just please, can you put your mic close like me? This. Well, thank you so much.
Okay. Suez Canal play a very important role in serving a world trade between East and West since its inauguration in 1869. And I also want to say that the main vision of Suez Canal is to provide uninterrupted service to the ships transit the canal with the highest level of security and safety. And this is to achieve customer satisfaction. I also want to mention that Suez Canal is under continuous development for its operational service. This is to improve the level of service and to cope with the challenges and opportunities in the maritime shipping market. The importance of Suez Canal comes from that it is the main route, of course, as we mentioned, between Asia and Europe, and 12% of the world trade is passing through Suez Canal. 24% of the container trade worldwide, and 100% of the container between Asia and Europe. If we look at the fleet of the type of ships passing the canal, it can accommodate 100% of the container ships in the market. This is 92% from the bulk fleet and 62% from the tankers. Now we come to the most important point, which has a very direct impact on reducing the emissions. The main role of the Suez Canal here is to shorten the distance between Europe and Asia compared with the other routes. If we compare it with the Cape, we have a saving of up to 23, up to 42%. For example, for the route between Tokyo, the trip between Tokyo and Rotterdam. And all these trips we have a reduction in distance between 23 and 42%. If we look at the U.S. East Coast ports and Asia, we have a saving of between 14 to 28% of the distance. I mean, this is for the trips between New York, Hong Kong, New York, Singapore, and New York. Also, as if we compare Suez Canal with Panama Canal, because we share part of the market with Panama Canal, also with the trips between U.S. the coast and Asia, we have a saving of up to 23% for the trip between New York and Singapore, and up to 60% for the trip between New York and Colombo. This is, of course, saving the distance, direct relation to the, reducing the consumptions of fuel. And this, of course, has another, can be translated directly to the reducing the emissions of the GHGs and the CO2 in particular. We can say, that, compared to the Cape, we have a reduction of the emissions can be between 10 to 90% for different kind of trips. And estimated the amount of reduction in bunker saving in the fuel, it was about 10 million tons in 2021. And this is reflected as 31 million tons of emissions of CO2. So that's why it is just direct, anyone, it can be estimated by each trip, the saving in distance, saving in fuel, and then it's translated to the reduction in the CO2 emissions. The indirect effect of Suez Canal on the emissions is that it is, of course, its strategic location in this route. So, we have, establishing a green fuel bunkering at East Port Said port for green methanol at the northern entrance of the canal, and there is also a green hydrogen hub is ongoing to be established at Sukhna port, in the Suez Canal economic zone. Also, we can say that Suez Canal implicitly support establishing the longest green corridor that is announced or declared between Rotterdam and Singapore in 2022. I also want to mention that Suez Canal has a sustainable strategy to declare that the canal will be a green canal by 2030. The main outlines of this strategy first is it will endorse the efforts of the IMO to reduce the emissions from maritime transport and encourage the use of clean non-fossil fuel. The other Suez Canal is also studying to provide some incentives to ships that is going to use green fuel. Also, in Suez Canal, generalizing the use of hybrid system for energy, providing energy to the control station along the canal. We have 16 control stations for the monitoring the transiting of ships, and we will use now some solar panel and just to make it, reduce the reliance on the fossil fuel. Also, in Suez Canal, convert the engines of some maritime units like the ferries and tugboats to work on natural gas instead of solar or diesel.
You do it on site. You propose this service.
Yes,
okay.
yes. Also, just Suez Canal with the optimum application of marine service procedure to avoid the pollution risk of oil spills. Also, we're establishing an eco-friendly marina at Ismailia and Suez Canal. And also, we're providing integrated waste management service at West Port Said port, to collect solid waste from the ships passing the canal and just make it safe disposal and recycling. There are other part of this strategy, which is just implementing continuous environmental monitoring along the canals and capacity buildings for specialists in environmental affairs.
My last question will be, and that will be the last point of this panel, is about safety, of course. So what are the main safety measures that you have in Suez Canal for ships to pass through the canal safely, and their impact on environmental considerations?
Yes, as Suez Canal, safety is the first priority for us. And I just want to tell you how complicated it is to manage the passing of ships in the canal with the increasing number. I mean, we touched the 23,000 ships, and in some days we are plus 85 ships per day. I want to tell you that, I mean, the size of ships are now very huge, and the container ships requirements for passing differ from the bulk and the effect of the environmental conditions. So we are dealing with a situation when we have ship characteristics, we have the channel characteristics, we have different environmental and natural conditions, type of soil differs, tidal currents is also not the same along the canal. The canal has some curved area, and also we have the pilotage, which is we have 4 pilots has to go on each ship along the whole trip. All these items, although we have the safety of the cargo on the ship itself, all these items has to be integrated together just to allow a safe pass of the ships. I mean, we have taken a set of safety measures. This can be just, first of all, is we have, of course, to make periodic maintenance dredging along the canal. I mean, because we have some, of course, at the approach channel, we have a lot of siltations due to the movement of current and waves, and also from collapsing from the sides of the canal. This needs to be dredged on an annual basis. Also, Suez Canal is going through, I mean, a certain, a range of development projects since its opening, because I mean the size of it is increasing by time. And the last 2 projects that we already done is the new Suez Canal, which increasing the doubling part of the canal to be 75 kilometers. And also there is now an ongoing project to develop the southern part of the canal. This is the decision of this development have been taken after the accident of Ever Given, because the navigation and control and maneuverability of ships in this part is very difficult, and during harsh environmental conditions, this can be very severe. And we want to avoid, of course, such a kind of accident as much as we can. Other things, also other measures, is the development of navigation safety and communication systems. We have, of course, a vessel traffic management system. The ships are monitored along its trip by a series of radars and it is monitored on the 16 stations along the canal, just to control the ship speed and to be sure that there are safe distance between the ships. Also, there is
as much as we can, because I've been led to know that every ship is different.
Exactly, but this is the
that's
one of the
very
challenges.
important.
Exactly, yes, you are right. That's why it is not that easy. I mean, I'm telling you now without the procedure. I will just tell. I mean, the pilot training. Of course, we have simulation complex that train the pilots of Suez Canal and also pilots of the lining ships. I mean, for instance, when a new container, the Mersk starts to be there, they send their pilots to be trained to pass the canal by these huge ships. At that time, we have also the navigation aids and tags and escort tags. I want just to mention the procedure for vessels to transit the canal. We have, I mean, this procedure is mentioned in the navigation rules, and this is, I just to tell you, we have some, the procedure include prior to transit, because the ships has to send its certificate to be sure to check its validity and technicality is we can go within the convoy, or it need a special transit. Also, we need to have to check the certificate of the shipment, of the cargo itself, to be that it's conformity with the safety standard. Then we have to arrange the convoy. The arrangement of the convoy is also another challenge, as we have to, based on the danger, the type of cargo, type of ships, size of ships, then we just arrange the convoy. And as I told you, I mentioned, we put the time intervals between each ship to avoid any, in case of any emergency, to any collision between 2 successive ships. And then the arrangement during transit, because the area of Suez Canal has gone through a lot of developments for the last 10 years. And we have a lot of ferries, floating bridges now, and this has to be, before the convoy start, we have to be very sure that the canal is clear. But okay, as you mentioned, we tried as much as to prevent this, any accident. But in case of any spill accident in Suez Canal, we have a strategy to combat the oil spills. The strategy is first, navigation should not stop during the combating of the oil spill accident, prevent the spill of oil from getting fire, protect the environment sensitive area along the canal, and start and finish combating work, of course, as soon as possible. The contingency plan for oil spill crisis, it is part of the national contingency plan of Egypt. Suez Canal is responsible to combat oil spills of up to 1,000 tons. The plan covers, of course, the whole length of the canal and its connected lakes. In case of any oil spill, we have to announce to the Egyptian Environmental Affairs Agency about the accident and then coordinate with them. And Suez Canal has 3 centers to combat oil spills. In the one at the north, and then one in the middle of the canal, and one at Suez. These centers are equipped with, of course, all needed facilities, booms with anchors, a different type of skimmers. We have oil receptor facilities, approved dispersant and spreaders, and high-pressure water jet machines to clean the revetments and the other keys and the boom clean.
Thank you so much, Mr. Daron. Merci beaucoup. Merci à vous. Nous sommes arrivés à la fin de ce panel. Vous pouvez applaudir nos intervenants.
So this brings us to the end of our panel. Please give them a round of applause. Thank you for your insights on maritime insurance and the impact of ESG. And now let's move on to the last panel with 3 speakers. We have 20 minutes ahead of us. So it's already 5:12. So Marc de Pomereau, Secretary General of the Franco Risk Club. Please give him a round of applause.
Monsieur Philippe Noireau, directeur du Risk Management Group Orange. Et Francis.
Philippe Noiro and Francis Mea, EY Consultant Associate.
Bonjour messieurs. Vous arrivez en fin de journée.
Well, you are, last but not least, in the day's work. We're going to debate of this topic. So I need to change mic. The question hovers around the main risks and the way in which we understand them, the way in which they are being understood by the organization, and whether these large organizations are prepared and braced for such risks. Let me ask a question to all of you, and you can complete what some of you may say. Can you give me a notion of the major risks? Said that way, it seems simple, but the nomenclature is important. The measure is important. What does the large risk correspond to, and who manages them, and how are they being managed? Thank you for giving me the floor. I'm going to talk preliminary on behalf of the Franco Risk Club, which is the outgrowth of AMRAE, which decided to create a Franco Risk structure, whose the calling is to manage the risks in insurance in the Francophone universe. So it is the reason for us being here, and would like to thank the Moroccan Federation for giving us the opportunity to talk about who are the risk managers who are going to process the major risks. And in passing, I would like to talk about the president of the Franco Risk Club, who could not be making it here, but he wanted to be here, and he thanks the representatives and the managers of the Moroccan Federation of Insurance for giving the floor to the club I will represent here. So now let me turn to the question, what are the major risks? And for it not there to be confusions. So in terms of insurance, when we talk about major risks, we will present the key accounts, and these key accounts for a small company, something for a company can be a major risk. This is why it is important. Yeah, You're perfectly right, so that it would not be ambiguous. Our position is that of key accounts, those having a relatively important size, a turnover, activity, international activity, that have a normalization of their risks, that requires insurance systems on several lines with captives, etc. So these who we represent. We're also going to talk about the major risks, the emergent risks, and that we will talk with my friends who are here attending. I will answer the first question. So the question is, what is it and how is that being done? To do that, of course, I would talk as a person in charge of insurance in another company, risk manager in terms of global risk management. But I'm going to answer through my testimonial and witness. So I have had bosses who would come to me after a loss and tell me what would happen. Are we going to really be insured? A risk that this is a catastrophic, a crisis moment. And the first question, and is a ERM risk manager is ill-named because he doesn't manage the risks. He or she coordinates and liaises that with two functions, the internal audit and internal control. These three functions work together in integrated approaches in key accounts that allows them to work with the other company functions, which is the business as usual, crisis management, security, safety, compliance, the legal department, human resources department, in order to put in place system protecting the companies against major risks. Main steps in the risk management: identify, assess through mapping, risk mapping, and system of assessment, which is not that of insurance, we've talked about earlier, and process. And what do we assess? We assess the risk of the company in all its expanses, both those from its environment, than the ones that will it create in terms of security and in terms of safety. So they are going to be analyzed according to probability and impact, and a risk mapping will reflect such a assessment. This is seen in a heat map or colored basket, which is only the synthesis of a very rich information where the risk is being named. We describe the causes and the consequences, and mostly describe the possibility to control it and its efficiency, which makes this document a confidential one indeed, that makes it possible to have an overview of all the risks of companies regardless of their nature. And the aim of ERP in a company is to bring the risks down to an acceptable level according to a risk appetite by the company in its specific background, which is different from one to another company. In this framework, insurance is a way to process, among other means, the risk, which aims to reduce the financial impacts as much as possible, but it goes through the setup of a lot of prevention and protection means in company that can come at play for protection on causes and consequences. The other means, we've talked about the essential tool, which is the mapping. There are a lot of other tools that also are to be accounted for in the ERM. There is the setup of a governance system. Francis will come back to that. In setting up a corporate culture in risk management, the definition of risk appetite, which is advisable, and a whole set of internal and external communication elements, all of which aim at apprising and informing the third parties and the stakeholders, but also to enlighten the company on risks and opportunity possibilities. Francis, top off with some word on the nexus between these major risks as seen by managers and those which are and can be insured. And also, it goes without saying that all of these players have to liaise, to exchange and to talk, which is not a fait accompli. What is important is that throughout such exercises of 360 degrees vision, fueled by regulations, catastrophic events, etc., and climate change, the list of risks is there, yeah, but we know how to manage them. In any case, by so doing, we acknowledge that the excom of the group, we're talking about major risks, and for the insurance, this potentially strong exposure has gotten cognizant of the fact that over and above their job of identifying risks and implementing them to be as much as possible doable, there is the risk of not making such a decision. There, my competitor will take the market and be losing, and there is the risk of taking too much. So no pain, no gain, of course, but it has to be organized, controlled, with informed consent. For many years now, the managers in large groups themselves are much more sold into the idea of this logic. So, no one sometimes may make a decision. The agreement with governance, Philip, you were talking about that, the managers, but also the board of directors that demand such results and such works be presented, where are the major challenges, the risks that are forthcoming, and for them, what's the group's capacity to face them? All of these are debate elements that are escalated up to the ExCom, and the managers must report to the board. And this is an evolution, as we see, in the dialogue with the insurers, in the debates, discussions as to the component of insurable risks, which is important, but not all. We have, with Philip and Mark, come to the conclusion that there is not yet a 360-degree vision. We're not so sure that the insurance officer with an ERM, since we have the two functions, are rarely reporting to the same general department. Do not enter into dialogue as to how to cross compensate. We know that the insurer has a marked interest for the company to improve its prevention. Is it efficient, well coordinated? I think there is ample room for improvements here. However, the common lingo about this topic is not really there. The very concept of occurrence, of frequency, of statistical data, since we've talked about the insurance rules, it's not my field, but it's not fully well understood and integrated in a given department. A little too technical. So how can we put all that into a dialogue in order to improve the risk management and curtail the costs? The reputational cost, the reputational risk is very important. And there is one particular risk, which is the mismanagement by managers, crisis management units that are ill-treated of understanding a major reputational risk that can have catastrophic impacts. And also sometimes the mismanagement of a crisis is even worse than the rare crisis. I think we have seen that over. You see the poor management. I think you've talked about all of the points that you wanted. The insurability. Are the insurers likely to play the game every time to insure all the major and large risks? That is a question in itself. On insurability, here we're talking about key accounts, but the subject of risk management also is as important for lesser and medium-sized companies. So we have to see to it that their subcontractors and vendors also have this approach of risk management. So it's not exclusively to the large companies of CAC 40 or whatever. Mark, we could also extend that or expand it to the public administrations and local governments. The problem of local governments is very important. They don't have the same approach and way of managing the risks. We were talking earlier with Sisman. Insurability, yes, but why is the question of insurability being raised in large key risks? Because the world has changed. That of insurance, indeed, has changed over the last 5 years. We have, up until 2024, a market very difficult where insurers have done a lot of things to increase premium quantums. There is no uninsurable risks because there's always a premium for those who want to pay. Well, the world has changed, and the insurers during that period and the companies and the businesses have changed behavior. The business world has changed behavior, had to change behavior because the level of the insurers' intervention is not anymore. So nature abhors vacuum, therefore the managers, business community had to face that difficulty to find insurers to meet their needs. Hence, companies have changed their behavior and have gone fetching out-of-the-box solutions that were related to the answers of the insurers, increase the deductibles, look for less guarantees, less warrants, or looking for other solutions. Act retention-wise with captive agents, and the captive agents and a large group we have put in place. We have developed developed the importance of our captive agencies, and we have worked more on the KYC, on the risk identification, by assessing the assets. Many things have changed. On their side, the insurers have found a certain balance back. They have taken a different stance, whereby they say today the market is a little more balanced. But the insurers have become very demanding, very exacting. They are very attentive, watchful on the technical aspects, on whatever measures insurers can take to protect their risks, and this is where the question of insurability certainly is really important and is being raised. It may come as a shock, but the insurers tend to the end of the air market to select the good or the bad risks. And they say some companies, because of nature and organization risks, they have the means to transfer risks to marketplace, and others, poor or bad risks, I don't want them. And this is where the large companies, the question is raised, what are we going to do when we have bad risks? So either because of nature or because of organization. Either the organization is poor, and hence we can improve it. But if these are nature-related risks, the likes of transfer of plant, factory, of waste management, what do we do with such risks? They don't want them anymore, the insurers, because there are certain volatility. The cyber risks, are they poor risks? Climate change risks, are they bad or poor risks? I worked in the energy sector company when we wanted to transfer risk to make investments in energy transformation. We're not sure to find insurance because over time we would not accept to do that. Once the earnest with which the question is raised, how do companies respond? They do it through either their organization, because therefore it is indispensable to put in place risk management models. Either they respond by organization, or because it's not enough, they are going to look for other solutions, and this is where the insurers can fear to be marginalized somehow, because lest I find an insurance solution, I could go elsewhere. I would have captive schemes, to have financial systems, to devise other solutions to meet with the insurer's needs. And I would like to give the floor to my friends. The take-home message is we need to get to work together. The question of insurability requires from us to be closer to the marketplace. And together, the risk managers must get closer to insurers, with the brokers and with the experts. A lot of benefits lie therein. Within the framework of the overall risk management, when there are new risks that crop up, so these are exacerbating risks. But with the experts, they all know the topic. We're going to work on the specific ad hoc features of each risk. For example, the cyber risk, which is a family of risks with very varied risks. Internal, sabotage, looting of data. We're going to try and find the way in which the cyber attackers can perpetrate an act that would be noxious to the company. It is different from one to another company, and this is the word. Cyber risks, generally speaking, is far-reaching. It's a catch-all word. So it is not only within the walls of the company. On AI now, what is really important, a source and essential risk factor, is the very quality of the outcomes and the findings that is dependent on the quality of the data that we get in the information system and on which the AI is going to be using. And I think that the artificial intelligence can overestimate the percentage of population having a certain number of characteristics, because internet, its main source of information, over-assesses this very case. And we have the famous coverage of National Geographic with the Afghan lady quite Obviously, there are not 20 or 30% who are present in these features in Afghanistan.
L'intelligence artificielle peut ressortir ce genre de statistiques.
And this is a context which is for each economic actor. The COVID pandemic is de facto a risk for a state that has the public health with causes and consequences. But for a key account company, it is rather the cause, not an availability of resources because of a stoppage of activity, whereas a small around the corner of the street restaurant, it's going to be a black sign. A strong impact, unimaginable event is the admin closure. You see that the context of the company is very important in accounting for the global overall risk management, and all such information must be reflected in the discussions with the insurers in such a way as to insurability, but the amount of the premiums and guarantees be adapted to each of the companies. That would be my last question, and please react, because there is a reorganization and ownership of the risks. Is it going to change this relationship that can take place between companies, insurance, going through the broker? In any case, it should be. And we see why it's complex. We have already the root cause of the difficulty. This is what Philip has just said. The insurer must really understand that en masse we need to have comparable data quantity events that can be described, and given the company we are almost in haute couture in the surgical branding A, B, or C, and we cannot, of course, just do it in a haphazard fashion. We need to find the right dosage. We need to also have a dialogue on the reality of the organization. And how, in working with their insurance, the company would fine-tune its coverage needs and a certain number of challenges, stakes, generally known ones. You're talking about AI, it's mostly an opportunity, primarily. I consider it to be an opportunity, but also it's a source of a lot of risks. I'm not going to mention all of them. Of data loss, understanding of the findings of whatever the AI recommends to do. Given from an insurer, I cannot say whether insurers can insure something against that, whereas if the recommendation of AI on a given product or behavior of a product sold to a client is erroneous or dangerous, the customer is going to pay a hefty price for that. So it is, everyone should be put around the same table, but again here the devil is in the details. Sometimes here there are super specific stakes. We need to work. I think we stand to win and to gain if we start meeting. So I think meeting midway. So throughout my years of experience, I did not have such exchanges as I have with the peers. Now, ERM managers in France and Europe, very few have had this exchange with the world of insurance, be it through the internal insurance director or the broker or the insurance company. Whereas, as I said earlier, in a well-designed mapping, not one, but tons, dozens of page information, including the auditing by the internal audit, there is a manner of information to really more know and have more information on the level of premium. I would like to advocate, to preach for my parish, in other words, whereby it is necessary to develop the risk management in all the companies, because it is the prevention, because the prevention is organization-wise, in the nature, in the management of assets and the corporate activities. We need to work more with the experts who are capable to identify the assets, work through ERM, with those who manage information systems. This is the calling, most particularly of the French Association MIA and the Franco Risk Club, whereby we need to support in managing the risk, because this is the very uncertain question put forth during the whole day. Prevention, triply. Prevention goes through a better understanding, assessment of risk, and a better exchange with everyone. So this is the solution. Prevention goes through more context, and this is where delighted and happy to be here today and talk about that. Thank you. And now we have come to the end of this panel discussion and this afternoon and of today. Well, a very nice cocktail reception, and make the most of your day's rest. See you tomorrow.